None of my sons came to my husband's funeral. Neither they nor their wives even called. They just sent messages saying, "We don't have time for your tragedies right now." And a couple of days later, another message. "So, what's the deal with the inheritance? How are we going to divide it up?" A week passed. And then they realized how badly they had screwed up. Continuing the story. But before we continue, please tell us what country you are from and how old you are. We really enjoy getting to know our audience. Enjoy listening. The sky over Harrison had been covered with a heavy leaden layer since early morning. It seemed as if nature itself was mourning my Timothy along with me. I sat in the front row of the funeral hall, my hands folded on my knees, my eyes downcast. To my right were 2 empty chairs. I had reserved them for Oliver and Anthony. Even before the service began, I knew they would not come. But I reserved them anyway. Because even a mother who has been betrayed always has a foolish, indestructible hope deep inside her. It dies last, even if her children do everything they can to stifle it. The coffin was closed, as Tim had requested in advance. Even in life, he didn't like to draw attention to himself, couldn't stand pomp and circumstance, and certainly not at his own funeral. On top, right on the lid, was a frame with his favorite photo. He is smiling there, against the backdrop of Lake Tahoe, where we used to vacation every year. It was a photo from 15 years ago, before the illness, before the doctors, before the pills, before the days when every pharmacy bill caused panic. Back then, we were still living real lives. "Valia, do you need anything?" Gail, sitting to my left, asked quietly. I shook my head. What could I possibly need? Not Tim. What about my sons? My sons made their choice long ago. Gail, my friend from the factory days. We worked side by side for most of our lives. Now she was holding my hand so tightly, so sincerely. And to be honest, that touch was the only thing keeping me going. The hall was gradually filling up. Most of the people who came were Timofey's and my former colleagues from Harrison Auto Plant. I worked there as an accountant for 35 years, he was an engineer. Many people came, even from far away, despite their age, some with canes, some bent over. Benjamin Clark, a lawyer, came. He had been our friend since our youth. He limps badly, but he came. Zoe, my former assistant, now the chief accountant, came with her husband. Even George Miller, the former director, flew in from Miami, where he has been living for the last few years. He stands with his hands clasped, his face serious. I suddenly felt warm inside because they had all come. Everyone except the 2 I was waiting for so much. I glanced at the door. It opened again. My heart skipped a beat, as if someone had punched me. But no, it was our neighbors, Uncle Colia and his wife. I looked down, suddenly feeling ashamed that I had hoped again, like a fool. "They're not coming," I whispered to Gail. "I know," she replied, squeezing my hand tighter. "But we're here." That was it. The service began at 11 o'clock sharp. Grandma spoke about Timofey, what kind of person he was, how he worked, how love connected us, 42 years of marriage. I listened as if through cotton wool. Yes, it was all true. But without Oliver and Anthony, without their farewell, the words seemed to pass me by. Timothy loved them, even when they hardly communicated with us. He believed that everything would still work out. I involuntarily remembered the day after which everything went downhill. It was the summer of 2015. Oliver was 34 at the time, married, and Kiryuka had just been born. Anthony was 31 and had just gotten engaged to Yulia. Both were working on their computers, in it, as they said. They came to us in the evening, sat down at the kitchen table, and said, "We have an idea. An app for trying on clothes on your phone. Smart, they say, they've calculated everything. But, they said, we need to invest." Mom, Dad, Oliver began. You sell the house, move to a simpler apartment, and we'll start the business. In a couple of years, when we take off, we'll buy you an even better place to live. Timothy looked at me silently, waiting for me to say something. But I just clung to the edge of the table with my hand. What do you mean, sell the house? We bought this house when we were young and paid for it over 20 years. Our children were born here. Everything happened here. Birthdays, illnesses, arguments, reconciliations. Everything we have is here. No, I said. I won't sell it. Mom, what are you talking about? Anthony snapped. This is the chance of a lifetime. What if it doesn't work out? I asked. We'll be out on the street. You just don't believe in us. Oliver almost shouted. Timothy tried to smooth things over. Let's think about it, he said. Maybe we'll give you some of the money, but not the house. They didn't listen. It was as if they had already made up their minds and we were just getting in the way. I remember Anthony standing up, saying coldly, now it's clear who believes in us, and leaving. Oliver followed him. The door slammed so hard that the windows rattled. A week later, Oliver called. He said he had found an investor. They now had everything they needed. They didn't need any help. It seemed like we should be happy for them, but his voice was cold, as if we were strangers. Then their project really did get off the ground, and they even bragged about it. But a year and a half later, it all collapsed. They couldn't beat the competition. Not a word of sorry or you were right. On the contrary, it felt more and more like they thought we were to blame. Like, if we had given them more money, they wouldn't have gone bankrupt. Since then, everything has been dry and formal. The grandchildren occasionally brought holiday greetings. But the warmth was gone. Timothy suffered. He tried to fix things, calling, inviting us to dinner, giving the grandchildren gifts. When I realized that nothing would work out, I simply backed off. I accepted it. My father's voice pulled me out of my memories. He said that now anyone who wanted to could speak. One by one, people stood up and spoke about Timothy, about his kindness, honesty, and humor. I nodded and cried. Yes, that's right. That was my Tim. When it was my turn, I could barely stand up. My legs were shaking and my voice was stuck in my throat. But I knew I had to do it. Timothy was the best person I knew, I began. A kind husband, a caring father, a reliable friend. He didn't hold grudges. He always tried to make peace, even when everyone else had given up. I looked at the empty chairs. Until the very end, he believed that we would be together. That family is forever. It was his last hope. After the farewell, everyone went to the cemetery. It was drizzling, a sharp, dreary rain, but no one left. My friends, those who had stood by me all my life, stayed until the very end. They stood as the coffin was lowered into the ground, as the first handfuls of earth thudded onto the lid. I stood nearby, no longer crying. The tears had already dried in the hall. Only a dull, sticky emptiness remained inside. Gail and a couple of other friends drove me home. They helped set the table and reheated the food they had brought, some pies, some salads. No one wanted to leave me alone. People sat, reminisced about Tim, told stories from work, funny ones, kind ones. I sat too, nodded where necessary, smiled. But it was as if I were not there. My body was here, but my soul was somewhere else, in another room, in another time. In that kitchen, where we had tea together that morning, argued about shopping, discussed grandchildren. By evening, almost everyone had left. Only Gail remained. I'll stay with you, she said, without asking, as always. We sat in the kitchen, drinking tea. In silence. But this silence was not heavy, but warm and calm. This only happens between very close people. Have you checked your phone? She suddenly asked. No, I sighed. There's nothing there anyway, Gail. How do you know? I reluctantly took out my phone. 2 unread messages were flashing on the screen. My heart skipped a beat. Was I hoping? Probably. The first message was from Oliver. Mom, sorry we couldn't come. We have an important presentation to clients. The future of the company depends on it. We don't have time for your tragedies right now. Kyle says hi. The second was from Anthony. Mom, how are you? Yulia and I are very busy, we couldn't get away. How are you going to divide the inheritance? Oliver and I need to plan the budget. I handed the phone to Gail. She read it. Her face hardened. Ungrateful, she began, but didn't finish. Val, you don't owe them anything. Nothing at all. I took the phone and put it face down on the table. You know what's the worst part? I said quietly. Tim held out hope until the very end. Every time he got worse, he asked me to call the guys. Maybe they'd come. He wanted to see them before he died. He wanted to make things right. But they didn't come, Gail said. They didn't come. Oliver said he couldn't reschedule the meeting. Anthony promised to come on the weekend, but he never showed up. And Tim died on Tuesday morning. He didn't see any of them. I looked at the photo on the wall, the one with the lake in the background. We're all there together, 10 years ago, before the quarrel, before the coldness. Tim has his arm around my shoulders, Oliver is next to Marina, Anthony is with Yulia, and little Kyle is sitting on his father's shoulders, smiling. Back then, we were a family. Or maybe we just seemed like one. What are you going to do? Gail asked. I looked away from the photo and looked at her. The morning after the funeral greeted me with silence. Not just silence, but a hollow emptiness. For almost 43 years, I woke up to the sounds of Tim snoring, shuffling across the floor in his slippers, clattering cups in the kitchen. And now, nothing. Silence. Gail left around 8. I promised I would call if I needed anything. I promised, knowing I wouldn't call. I don't like to burden others. All my life I've tried to cope on my own. I can do it now. I got out of bed and automatically went to the kitchen. I made coffee, as usual, for 2. And only then did I remember that Timothy was gone. I poured out half the coffee. Habit. Another one I'll have to unlearn. The phone was on the table. I picked it up and reread yesterday's message from my sons. We don't have time for your tragedies. How are you going to divide the inheritance? 10 years have passed since that quarrel. And the wound still hurt. Not for them, for me. They seem to have long since stopped caring. They got their investor, started their business, and went bankrupt. And even after that, there were no apologies, no acknowledgement that Tim and I were right. On the contrary, it was as if we were to blame. As if we had given them money, they would have survived. Timothy kept trying to fix things, calling, inviting them over, even when he himself was not well. And in response, endless excuses, work, children, things to do. I remember how he struggled to get up after a seizure, put on a shirt, went to visit Oliver, and stood at the door. They forgot that he had promised to come. When he completely gave up, I called myself. I said he was getting worse. I begged them to come. Oliver ended up coming for an hour. Then he left, saying he had a meeting. Anthony never came. When Tim died, I called them both. They offered their condolences, promised to be at the funeral, and didn't come. The phone in my hand vibrated. A new message. From Anthony. Mom, Oliver and I want to know when the will be read. The sanatorium has already contacted you. I put the phone back on the table, screen down. Inheritance, money. That's what they're thinking about now. Not about my loneliness or the loss of their father. Only about who would get what. But they used to be different. Oliver was serious and responsible. I remember how he helped me around the house and how he protected Anthony from the boys in the yard. And Anthony was gentle and kind, always feeling sorry for everyone, both people and animals. He would bring home a kitten or a bag of bread for the old lady from the next building. He was sensitive, impressionable. He cried over sad movies. When did everything change? When did money become more important than family? Maybe I missed something? Maybe I made a mistake in raising them? Or is that just life? It changes people. And not always for the better. The phone rang. Gail. How are you, dear? She didn't even say hello. I'm alive, I replied. I'll come over now. I'll bring lunch. And don't argue, she added, not letting me get a word in. That's how she always was, my Gail. We met at the plant 36 years ago. She is 5 years older than me, but more energetic than many younger people. She lost her husband 15 years ago. She didn't fall into despair or withdraw into herself, but threw herself into her work and then into volunteering. I have always admired her strength. Okay, I said. I'll be waiting. Gail arrived 40 minutes later with a pot of borscht and a box of buckwheat casserole. Everything was hot, steam was rising, and the smell immediately spread throughout the kitchen. I was sitting on a stool at the table, wearing a bathrobe. My hair was tied back haphazardly. She put the food down, turned on the kettle, and silently draped her knitted shawl over me. You're losing weight, Val, she said sternly. My cheeks were completely sunken. My skin was gray. So why should she be rosy-cheeked? I smiled. Cheer up, girl. You have to eat anyway. You have to stay alive. Your Tim's only one left now. He wouldn't want you to starve here. I nodded silently. It's true. Timothy always made sure I ate on time so I wouldn't run around hungry. Especially since I started having stomach problems. Even when he could barely stand, he would push a plate toward me. You eat, Val. I'll eat later. We ate in silence but not awkwardly. Just like that. Like at home. Then I washed the dishes, Gail wiped the table, checked the medicine cabinet, as usual, wagged her finger at me for the expired pills, and only then left. She said she would come back tomorrow. When she closed the door behind her, I went into the room and sat down on the sofa. I took out an old box of documents. There were Tim's papers, medical records, certificates, old letters, his notebook. I went through everything slowly, as if I were touching his hands through the paper. I found a copy of his will. He had had it drawn up by a notary a year ago, before the disease finally took him. Everything was left to me. The house, the land, the car, the savings, everything in my name. He said then, Val, I don't want to hurt anyone, but you've been with me my whole life. You lay with me in the hospital, washed my feet, put up with my whims. And the children? Let them live their own lives. This isn't about them. I cried then. Hard. Not because of the money, but because he remembered. He appreciated me. He didn't write me off, as men over 50 often do. I put the papers back, closed the box, and put it back in its place. My phone vibrated again. For the third time that morning. I opened it. A new message from Oliver. Did you talk to the notary? We need to figure out what assets we have and who will manage them. Marina and I are in a difficult financial situation right now. Clarity is important to us. I closed the chat. My heart was pounding heavily, as if from hurt, as if from anger. Timothy wasn't even cold in the ground yet, and they were already dividing up his assets. They didn't even call. I didn't hear their voices, only dry, businesslike, soulless messages. As if I were their accountant, not their mother. In the evening, I went to the garden. It had been neglected for a long time. Since Tim got sick, I had neither the strength nor the mood to tend to it. But he loved this garden so much. The pear tree he planted himself still stood by the gate, thin and leaning. I ran my hand over the bark. Cold, damp, Nearby was the flower bed where he planted marigolds every spring. Tim, I whispered, not knowing why. Just so that someone would hear. Thoughts swirled in my head, heavy and sticky. But I could have given everything away. Share it. The grandchildren would get it eventually. But after everything they did, or rather, didn't do. They didn't even say goodbye to their father. Maybe if they were here, I wouldn't be clutching the paper so tightly. Maybe I would offer it to them myself. But not now. Not after these messages. The next day, I got a call from the notary, Benjamin Clark, an old friend of the family who had drawn up the will. Valerie, hello. I wanted to express my condolences and let you know that we can set a date for the reading of the will. I have everything ready, but I need your consent. When will you be ready? Thank you, Benjamin. I'll think about it. I understand that it's hard for you to make quick decisions right now. Just know that everything is in your hands. I have the will. If the children start to pressure you, call me. I'm on your side. After the conversation, I sat by the window for a long time. I looked at the street, at the passers-by, at the neighbor's car. Everything was going on as usual. But inside me, it was like a black hole. The loss of my husband, disappointment in my sons, pressure. I had always been strong, tried not to whine, not to bother them with my tears, not to ask for anything. But now it was really hard. The next day, Gail brought a bunch of food and a couple of magazines. Then she sat down, looked at me, and said, "Why don't you come live with me for a while?" Gail, what are you talking about? Your apartment is small. So what? I don't mind. And you won't go crazy here all alone. And then, maybe you'll cheer up. Maybe you'll think about how to move on with your life. I shook my head. Despite everything, I feel calm here. Everything is here, Tim. His things, his scent, his garden. I can't leave all that behind. Gail didn't argue. She just sighed and looked out the window. You know, Val, I used to think that loneliness was when there was no one around. But now I realize it's worse when there seems to be someone there, but in fact there is no one. You're going through that right now. I nodded. Because it's true. A few more days passed. Everything in the house was in its place, as if time had frozen. I didn't touch anything. Timofeyev's sweater was still hanging on the back of the chair in the bedroom. His cup was on the shelf next to the sugar bowl. Even the radio he listened to in the evenings was still plugged in. Only he himself was gone. And with him, some kind of mainstay in life was gone. And what was called family turned out to be just a word. Anthony didn't call. Another message came from Oliver. Without Mom, just businesslike, we are interested in the market value of the property. Can you send us copies of the documents? We want to calculate the tax burden if there is a sale. I clenched the phone in my hand. That's it. They're not even trying to hide why they need me. The house, the land, the possible sale. And what about me, their mother, who has lived here for 40 years, who will be buried here? It doesn't matter. They have a burden. I closed the message, got up, and went to the storage room. Down there, under an old suitcase, was a box with Mom's children's albums. I opened the first one I found. In the photo, I am young, Timothy is carrying the boys on his shoulders. It is a summer day, on the lawn. Oliver is about 6, Anthony is 4. Everyone is laughing. Then, New Year's Eve, Oliver is wearing a Santa Claus hat, Anthony is holding a tangerine, his eyes are shining. And then, their school years, graduation, the army, college. All the pictures are like a slap in the face. We used to be close. We lived soul to soul. I gave everything. All of myself. And now? Now I'm just an elderly woman. A property owner. I sat with these photos on the floor until it got dark. I didn't cry, no. It wasn't even painful anymore, but bitter and disgusting. As if everything inside was rotten. I was distracted by the ringing melody of the landline phone. Hardly anyone calls on it anymore. I picked up the receiver, the voice was unfamiliar. Good evening, is this Valerie Timofeyevna? Yes. My name is Arthur Price. I was a friend of your husband's. We used to work together on projects in the research and development department of the factory. He told me a lot about you. I'm sorry I couldn't come to the funeral, I was ill. Thank you for calling. I immediately sensed that his voice was sincere. No pretense. It wasn't one of those polite calls. I was recently going through our joint work and found an old folder with drawings and his notes. There's something interesting there. Would you like to take a look? I think it will be important to you. Of course, I would be grateful. We agreed that he would come by the next day. I hung up the phone and something shifted in my chest. Someone else remembered Tim, not just as a name, but as a person, a specialist, a comrade. It was like a breath of fresh air. In the morning, Arthur Price arrived, gray-haired, with a cane, but lively. He brought the folder and put it on the table. We sat down in the kitchen. He said that he had worked with Timofey in the late 90s, when the plant was going through a difficult period and many developments never came to fruition. But the ideas were serious, good ideas. He was a real engineer, Arthur said. Not like they are now. He lived and breathed this work. And he always talked about you. With such warmth. He literally glowed when he mentioned you. I pressed my lips together so I wouldn't cry. And he took a photo out of the folder, black and white, an old laboratory, Tim, Arthur himself, and 3 others. All young, in white coats. Laughing. Happy. We believed then that we could change something, he said. That technology was the future. And Tim said something then that I still remember. The main thing is to have light at home, Val is waiting, and nothing else matters. After Arcady left, I stared out the window for a long time. His words echoed in my head. Timothy always put his family first. Even when his sons began to drift away, he didn't give up. He believed that everything could still be salvaged. He believed until the very end. A couple of days later, I went to see Benjamin Clark, our notary. He greeted me warmly and kindly. He sat me down, poured me some tea, and showed me the documents. Val, Tim left everything to you. The house, the land, the account, even the old 10, in your name. He wrote to his wife, who was with me until the last day and never turned away. I nodded, not out of surprise, but out of gratitude. What should I do next? I asked. If you want, you don't have to announce the will yet. It's your right. Let them wait. I thought about it. And it was true. Why should I run at their beck and call? Let them wait for once. Let them feel that it's not so simple. That life is not just about dividing property. When I left Benjamin's, it was almost dark. The air smelled of October, wet leaves, dampness, the first night frosts. I walked down the street slowly, without rushing. And suddenly I felt it was a little easier to breathe. Maybe because for the first time in all these weeks, I had taken a step not on someone else's orders, not in someone else's interests, but for myself. After meeting Benjamin, I felt a little better. Not happy, no. But as if my back had straightened inside. I returned home, sat down in the kitchen, brewed some strong black tea, and just sat in silence for a long time. The phone was silent. My sons were apparently waiting for an answer. Let them wait some more. I took a sheet of paper and started writing a to-do list. Not for anyone else, but for myself. Change the light bulb on the porch. Sort through the first aid kit. Wipe down the shelves in the pantry. All the things Timothy usually did himself, and now it was my turn. You can't live in a void. You can't just sit there and feel sorry for yourself. You have to slowly pull yourself out of it. No complaints, no tears in public. The next day, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw a young woman, about 30 years old, with a child in her arms. The child was a girl, curly-haired, big-eyed, about 2 years old, no more. The woman hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Excuse me, are you Valerie Timofeyevna?" "Yes," I said, surprised. "I'm Allison. I'm sorry, maybe this isn't a good time. I used to be with your Anthony. We dated before he met Yulia." I didn't know what to say. I looked at the girl and my heart was pounding. We didn't part on good terms. I left for Kazan, then came back to Harrison. Anthony didn't know I was pregnant. I decided not to tell him. He was in a different world back then, all caught up in business and projects. And I didn't want to get in the way. She held the child closer. The girl yawned and snuggled up to Mom. "I'm not after money," Allison said quietly. "I don't need anything. It's just that she's growing up, and I don't want her to find out from someone else. Or think that her father abandoned her. I want you to know. Just know." I was silent. I looked at this girl, tiny and thin, and felt everything inside me turn upside down. My little granddaughter. Mine. And I didn't even know she existed. "What's her name?" "Allison." After me, the woman smiled. "Can I come closer? Can I hold her?" Allison nodded and gently handed the baby to me. I held the little girl close to me. She wasn't scared. She just buried her face in my shoulder and yawned. "She's beautiful," I whispered. "I didn't want to interfere in your life," Allison said quietly. "But when I found out that Timothy had died, that you were alone, I thought you might want to know. I'm not asking for anything. Just let me be there if you ever." I nodded. "Thank you for coming. And thank you for not keeping quiet." They left half an hour later. I stood at the window, watching them go, and cried. But these were different tears. Not of pain. Not of grief. Somehow, they were bright. Maybe because for the first time in a long time, I had been given something real, something warm. Without any strings attached, without any demands. Just a granddaughter. In the evening, as scheduled, Gail came over. From the doorway, she immediately noticed that I was different. "What happened?" "I have a granddaughter, Gail," I said. "Can you imagine?" "What other granddaughter?" I told her everything. She listened attentively, without interrupting, then nodded slowly. "That's life," she sighed. "Imagine, Val, how much we don't know. And how easily we can lose someone without even knowing we had them." We had tea and dinner. Then Gail left and I went to bed and couldn't sleep for a long time. The little girl's face was before my eyes. She didn't look like Anthony at all. She was just like her mother. But in some way, in her eyes, in her expression, there was something familiar. Mine. Tim. I thought, maybe she is the unexpected turn in my life. Small, almost imperceptible, but real meaning. In the morning, Oliver wrote to me again. This time, insistently. "Mom, we don't understand. What are you doing? We are your children. We have a right to know about the inheritance. If everything is registered only in your name, it's unfair. We are entitled to a share. Please explain what you intend to do. We don't want to take legal action, but if we have to, you'll be forcing our hand." I reread the message 3 times. Then I calmly closed my phone and went to cook porridge. I put a pot on the stove, turned on the gas, and took out the salt. Everything was as usual. But inside, nothing was trembling anymore. No fear, no resentment. Only a firm understanding that I owed nothing to anyone. I had not betrayed anyone. I lived according to my conscience. And if they forgot what family is, that's their choice. Timothy once said that family is not about biology. It's about who is there for you when you're feeling down. And Gail is there for me now. Little Allison. Even Arthur Price, who brought the old folder with the drawings. And my sons, they're somewhere in another world. where everything is decided by percentages, profits, and market valuations. And I suddenly realized that I could live without them. Not out of spite, but out of inner liberation. Simply because I've lived long enough not to cling to those who don't hold your hand when you're in pain. The next day I went downtown to pick up a certificate from the clinic and stopped by the pharmacy. I was still a little nervous driving. Tim had always been behind the wheel, and even though I had a license, I hadn't driven in a long time. But it was okay, I managed. On the way, I caught myself thinking that I no longer felt the emptiness that had suffocated me the first week. Was it hard? Yes. Lonely, definitely. But it was as if something inside me was starting to come back together. Not the way it was before. Different, quieter, deeper. At the pharmacy, I ran into Vera Nikolaevna. She used to work with us at the plant, then she retired. We hadn't seen each other in 10 years. Valerie? Is that really you? Yes, it's me, Vera. She looked at me intently, as if assessing how much I had changed. I heard that Timothy died. My condolences, dear. Thank you, I nodded. Yes, he's gone. How are your children? She asked suddenly. I held my breath for a split second. Then I calmly replied, they're alive. Everyone has their own life. We hardly communicate. Vera Nikolaevna sighed, saying that everyone is like that now. My grandson in Moscow hasn't visited me once in a year. But when I was young, I would have walked through fire for my parents. We stood there for another 10 minutes, chatting, then said goodbye. And I kept thinking about her words. That's how it is for everyone now. Maybe it's true, maybe it's normal. The children have scattered. They've grown apart, each with their own schedule, their own interests, their own values. But my soul still hopes, just like when I was a child, that they will come, hug me, and say, Mom, I'm sorry. But no. In the evening, Gail came with someone. She was with a man in his 60s, tall, strong, with calm eyes. At first, I tensed up. I don't like surprises. Val, meet Roman. We work together in a volunteer group at the dacha. He helps elderly women with their gardens. He's a widower himself. By the way, Roman held out his hand and shook mine firmly. I've heard about you. Gail told me a lot. Your tomatoes are good, by the way, he added with a smile. Last year, she gave me your seeds. To be honest, I was embarrassed. I'm not used to being looked at like that. Not with pity, but as a normal person. Not as a poor widow, but simply as a woman. The three of us sat in the kitchen. We drank tea and ate pie. Roman turned out to be simple, calm, without unnecessary words. He didn't pry into my soul. He didn't ask about my sons. He talked about the garden, about apple trees, about how there are so few real varieties now, all hybrids. And then he left, saying goodbye politely. When I closed the door behind him, Gail looked at me slyly. Well? What well? He's a normal man, isn't he? Normal. Only I'm not at the age to have affairs. And he's not for affairs. He's for having someone to drink tea with, someone to talk to, someone to be silent with. I didn't answer. But something stirred inside me. Not from the desire to let someone into my life, but from the very fact that it was possible. That not everything had stopped. That life, it turns out, did not end with Tim's departure. The next day, another message came from Anthony. A short Mom, you're ignoring us on purpose. We're not asking for much. Just let us know what's going on. We're not your enemies. I looked at it for a long time. Then I sat down at the table, took out a piece of paper, and wrote, Anthony, Oliver, you are not my enemies. I gave birth to you, raised you, loved you, and continue to love you, no matter what. But right now, I need some quiet. No judgments, no complaints, no reminders about my share, just silence. So I can figure out myself, Life without Tim, what will happen next? I'm not hiding anything. The will is with the notary. Everything is done according to the law. Everything is fair. You are grown men. You have your own families. I am not asking you for help, money, or visits. But please, don't pressure me. I am trying to survive. Just survive. And if you still have even a little understanding left inside you, let me do it in peace. Mom. I photographed the letter and sent it to both of them. No comments. No apologies, no hopes for understanding. Just as it is. A couple of hours later, Anthony replied. I understand. I'm sorry. Let's take a break. No word from Oliver. But I wasn't expecting any. I turned off my phone, lay down on the sofa, covered myself with a blanket, and for the first time in a long time, fell asleep in the afternoon. No tears. No anxiety. Simply because it had become quiet inside. About 2 weeks have passed since then. November crept up unnoticed, gray, damp, with an icy wind that chills you to the bone. I learned a new way to make tea, for one. I learned not to set out a second plate. I learned not to turn around when the door creaks, because it's not Tim anyway. I learned to go out into the garden in silence. Without his comments, without reminders about my hat. And you know, it's not about loneliness. It's about moving on with life. About letting go slowly, not forgetting, but accepting. Allison and her daughter came twice more. The girl now reaches out to me, calling me Gran. I'm in no hurry, I don't push, but something is growing in my heart. Warm. Real. She sits on my lap, listens to me read a fairy tale, plays with beads, and I feel needed again. Unconditionally. Without calculation. Gail, as promised, brought Roman over a couple more times. He helped with the fence, then fixed the old gate, then repaired the outlet in the kitchen. He didn't pry into my soul or fawn over me. He just did it. He was just there. I don't know what's between us, and do I need to know right now? I'm glad he's there. And whatever happens, happens. One evening, we were sitting on a bench by the house. It was quiet. There was no wind. The leaves, dry and brittle, lay like a thick carpet. I was holding an old mug of tea in my hands, and he was silent. Then he suddenly said, "You're strong." I smiled slightly. Everyone says that, but inside, it's like porridge. No. Weak people feel like porridge too. Only they fall under it. But you stand tall. I didn't answer. But his words stayed with me for a long time. A couple of days later, the notary called me. Val, your sons have filed an official request. They want a copy of the will. They have the right to do so. Formally, yes. But you can still refuse to give your consent to the official announcement. If you don't want everything to be put on paper, you have the right to keep it. But they are determined. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and went into the garden. I sat down on a bench by the fence and sat there for a long time. I didn't cry. I just thought, you know, I could have gone along with them. Given them a share. Pretended that everything was as it used to be. That we were a family. But that would have been a lie. And I don't want a lie anymore. Not to myself, not to them. And then I made a decision. Without emotion. Simply because it was the right thing to do. The next day, I went to the notary's office myself and asked Benjamin to officially announce the will. Let it be as it should be. Let them get copies. Let them know everything. I also asked to draw up a deed of gift for a small piece of land in the name of Alina and her daughter. Where Tim used to plant marigolds. I said it was just so she would have a connection to this land. So she would know that she also has roots here. Benjamin was surprised, but he didn't ask any questions. He always knew when to keep quiet. 3 days later, Anthony called me. His voice was dull, as if he were tired. Mom, I read everything. I didn't know Dad had arranged everything like that. I thought you were cutting us off. On principle. It's not on principle, Tasha. I just don't want to live on tiptoes anymore. I don't want to make excuses. I did everything I could for you. And yes, I'm tired. I understand, I'm sorry. He didn't ask for a share, didn't talk about money. He just hung up. I sat there, looking at her like the silence after a storm. And then a message came from Oliver. Very short, let it be as you have decided. Just don't expect anything from us anymore. I reread it, and that was it. No pain, no tears. Just fatigue. Deep, like after a long journey. But even that was a relief. Because now everything was clear. Clean. Without pretense. In the evening, I went out into the garden and walked across the wet grass. I approached the tree. Tim's pear tree. Standing, swaying, reaching for the sky. I ran my hand along the trunk. That's it, Tim. Everything is in place. As you asked, calmly, conscientiously. The silence was not deafening. It was peaceful, as if he himself were standing nearby, slightly to the side, as before, when he simply remained silent. And that made me feel better. Winter came unnoticed. First, it wasn't in the mornings, then there was light snow, and then there were knee-deep snowdrifts. I replaced the curtains with thick ones, took out my winter boots, and started heating the stove in the bathhouse, little by little, for warmth and comfort. Without Tim, everything was different, but the habit of living proved stronger than the habit of grieving. I didn't wait for calls from my sons, and I didn't receive any. After that last message from Oliver, there was silence. Anthony didn't call anymore either. I didn't blame them. I just accepted that everyone has their own path. They chose theirs. And I chose mine. And now, their approval is less important to me than my own peace of mind. Gail, as always, was there for me. She came with fresh news, pies, and her endless worries. She laughed, swore, and bustled about. Her voice was like a radio in the house, like life going on despite everything. Roman also started to show up more often. Without hints, without words, or maybe with them. He was just there. Once he brought me an extension cord. Then a new shower head. He fixes things, keeps quiet, drinks tea, sometimes jokes. And I don't mind. I don't need a new husband. But a person with whom I can share the evening is already a gift. Allison and her daughter also became almost like family. The girl is growing up, babbling her words, running around the rooms, laughing. I bought her a stuffed rabbit, the same one Anthony gave her on her 3rd birthday. And now it's back in a child's hands. Life goes in circles. One day, Allison stayed for tea. We sat together while the baby slept. Thank you, Valerie Timofeyevna, she said, looking at her cup. I thought you wouldn't accept me. I was afraid, but there was nothing to be afraid of, I replied quietly. You told me everything honestly. And you didn't ask for anything. And I understood everything myself. She smiled. Quietly. Tired. A young but already tired woman. I saw myself in her. Myself, back then, in my early 30s, with 2 children, sleep-deprived and anxious. Only for her, it might be even harder alone. I wrote to the land registry, I added. For my daughter. A small piece of land. But it might come in handy someday. Let her know that she has roots. Alina's eyes filled with tears. But she didn't cry. She just nodded. I don't know how to thank you. Don't. Just come. Sometimes. Have some tea. Say hello. In January, I went out into the garden again. The snow was knee-deep, everything was white and quiet. The pear tree stood covered in frost. I walked over and touched the trunk. Strong, rough, like Tim. I stood in complete silence. And suddenly I realized I was no longer alone. Not like before. But definitely not alone. Gail was there, with her sharp tongue and pies. Allison was there, with her honesty and fragility. Roman was there, with his quietness and reliability. There was a little girl who calls me Gran and pulls my hands when I enter the room. Yes, my beloved sons are far away. Even further away inside. But I still have myself. Strong. Whole. Unbroken. And I don't hold grudges. I don't seek revenge. I just move on. Honestly. Without pretense. Without humiliation. Because, as Tim once said, the main thing is to know who you are. And not to betray yourself, even if everyone else is gone. And I didn't betray myself. Thank you for listening to this story to the end. If it resonated with you, please like it, subscribe, and be sure to write in the comments if you've had similar experiences or what you think about it. It helps promote the video and inspires me to create more heartfelt stories like this. Thank you very much. Be healthy, live long and happily.